Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to these beautiful surroundings of the Royal Society. Before I hand over to our President, I'd just like to add a few words of welcome. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Seb Hargreaves, the Executive Director at the OR Society. It falls to me to mention a couple of items of housekeeping before we get proceedings underway. A huge welcome to our 2023 annual Blackett Memorial Lecture and Awards Ceremony. If we're not expecting any emergencies or fire alarms, so if the fire alarm does sound, please make your way outside the building through the nearest exit, and we assemble just down the steps out on the front of the building. I would ask if you could please keep your mobile devices on silent, if that's okay, during this evening's presentations. And just to remind you that there are ladies, gents, and accessible toilet facilities and a cloakroom on the lower ground floor as well, and there's lifts available as step-free access too. We will start the proceedings this evening with our awards. The President will announce each award and the award recipient before reading out the citation. Once the citation has been read out, if the award winners could then make their way up onto the stage, on the steps on that side of the stage, they'll be presented with their award and an opportunity for a photo in the centre of the stage alongside the President. Following the awards ceremony, we've got our speakers this evening, and then there'll be a short question and answer session as well before we move through to a drinks reception to close the evening's celebration. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the OR Society's President, Dr. Gilbert Owusu.
Thank you very much, Seb, and a big welcome to each one of you for joining us tonight for this year's Blackett Lecture. It's a special year for us because it's our 75th anniversary, and as per custom, for these events, they are in two parts. So the first part, as Seb mentioned, we will be presenting some awards for some of our members, reflecting the work that they've done in the society. And then we go on to the main event, which is different this year, okay, because the theme for our 75th anniversary is the past, present, and future. We have three eminent speakers who would reflect on the theme accordingly. We have Dr. Roger Further, who reflect on the operational research roots in retrospect, looking at the early beginnings of the operational research and reflecting on the decades since. This will then be followed by Paul Clark, who will then talk about how physical and digital worlds collide. And this highlights the role of modeling and simulation in decision-making, a key strand of operational research. And then finally, we'll have Professor Alison Etheridge, who will talk about the National Academy for the Mathematical Sciences, which was first put forward by the Philip Bond Review in 2018. And again, this reflects the important role of the Academy for the society and a recognition of maths as we move forward. And a lot of focus being given to this by the government. But before we get onto that, we'll start with celebrating our award winners tonight. So the first, it's our Bill Medal. So this year's medal winner is Robert Dyson. So the Bill Medal is awarded in recognition of the sustained contribution over many years to the theory, practice, or philosophy of OR in the UK or some combination of those areas. So a bit of citation. I'll be doing this for some of the awards. So Robert Dyson is an emeritus professor at Warwick Business School. He has had a sustained and significantly impactful career in OR, approaching 60 years. His career started in 1964 as a mathematician and senior systems technologist at Pilkington PLC, during which time he also undertook a PhD in OR at Lancaster University. In 1970, he joined Warwick University as a lecturer in OR, and within 10 years, rose to professor and served his first of 2 terms as head of the business school. He was head of the OR group at Warwick Business School for several years, and as a senior member of the university, put his methods related to OR and strategy into practice, both at the departmental and central university levels. Robert has been hugely influential in several fields within OR, and is one of few researchers whose research, practice, and publication span both hard and soft OR. In the 1980s and 1990s, he led a successful research team in data envelopment analysis and performance management at Warwick Business School, which led to many highly cited works in the field. In addition, he has published journal articles and books in the area of OR and strategy. Much of his research in this area is empirically based, with some originating from his 2 terms as Pro-Vice Chancellor at University of Warwick. He has also researched and published on soft OR, financial modeling, and stochastic programming. Robert has also played a significant role in developing the OR Society, serving as president 1998 to 1999, and leading the introduction of the current professional membership scheme. He served as chair of COPIO from 1995 to 1997, and was awarded Companion of OR in 2007. He chaired a number of the Society's conferences, and more recently, he has contributed internationally to the development of the field, serving as editor of the European Journal of Operational Research from 2006 to 2020. His most recent publication, exploring the contributions of the founders to soft OR and OR practice, has been well received. I would like to invite Robert to kindly come up to receive the Bill Medal for this year. The next award is the Companion of OR. And this year's winner is John Hobbs. The Companion of Operational Research is awarded for sustained and support encouragement for the development of operational research, or for those influential positions who are in broad sympathy with your subject of the area. Such contributions might be through public or private activities. I'll just read the citation for John. The award of Companion is expected to meet one of 6 different requirements. And this nomination for John Hobbs falls into category 5. That is those who have given outstanding service to the OR Society. John has spent almost all his working life and beyond in operational research. His career started with Shell and progressed to various stints in consulting, finishing as the global head of analytics at EY. John has volunteered with the OR Society for an extended period of more than a decade. He was first elected to the General Council and Board at the start of 2011, serving 6 years as vice president, and in 2017, he became president-elect, serving 2 years as president from 2018 to 2019, and finishing with an extended spell as past president, 2 years due to COVID, the COVID pandemic. Of course, this is almost certainly the most extended continuous spell on the board and general council since the new constitution came into force in 2006, and possibly the longest allowable under those rules. John's term on the board coincided with a long period of growth for the society, taking on new initiatives and the staff to manage those. Under his leadership as president, the society continued to build its strong financial base. John has been a key contributor to the society embracing analytics, building its position and offering the widening analytical community. He has been a member of what is now known as the Analytics Development Group since its inception, ensuring new offerings such as the Analytics Networks, the Analytics Summit, and the Journal of Business Analytics have become an established part of the society's work. John's financial acumen has been vital for the society as its revenue has grown over the last decade, and he continues to share his expertise as a member of the investment committee, helping to see the society through some very turbulent times with the COVID pandemic, the Ukraine war, and the subsequent cost of living crisis. John continues to represent the society through its Alliance for Data Science Professionals membership, ensuring that the OR Society is at the heart of an initiative key to this area. He recently took on the role of secretary to HORAF, the Heads of Analyticals Forum, and in this position, he can continue to ensure that the society and the wider OR community can develop and extend its influence in the wider analytical world. John is an exceptional candidate to become a companion of OR, rewarding his lasting work with the society. And I'd like to kindly welcome John to receive this year's Companion Medal. Now turning to our general awards. So the first in this category is the Good Eve Medal. And this year's winners are Elvin Golkarp, M. Salim Kakir, and Johannes Kukolas. The Good Eve Medal is awarded in recognition of the most outstanding contribution to the philosophy, theory, or practice of OR, published in the Journal of the OR Society within the relevant year, and that is 2022. The medal this year goes to Alvin, as mentioned, Salim, and Johannes. Their paper deals with a very serious current problem that is likely to grow in the future with climate change and other factors. It deals with the management and funding of migrant centers. The problem is complex, as arrival, departures, and other factors are randomly variable. The complexity could lead to impossible calculations. However, the authors use an approximate dynamic programming method, leading to reasonable runtimes. The model is tested out on 5 Greek islands near the Turkish coast. What is particularly interesting is that the sensitivity of the variables can help managers evaluate options. So I'd like to invite Salim to come and collect this year's award on behalf of the team. Elvin and Johannes are not here with us. Next is the Stafford Beer Medal. And this year's winners are Tampani Rinta Kahila, Ida Sommer, Nicole Gillespie, and Marta Indulska, and Shelley Greger. The Stafford Beer Medal is awarded in recognition of the most outstanding contribution to the philosophy, theory, or practice of information systems published in the European Journal of Information Systems within the relevant year, and this was 2022. We award the Stafford Beer Medal to Tampania, to Ida, Nicole, Marta, and Shirley for their paper, Algorithmic Decision-Making and System Destructiveness, a case of automatic death debt recovery. The judges were impressed with the timeliness and pertinence of articles in the recent volume of Aegis under the consideration for the Stafford Beer Award, tackling issues such as fake online reviews, the risk of applying people's analytics and automated algorithmic decision-making. This latter topic is addressed in the winning paper. The paper examines the negative unintended consequences of algorithmic decision-making using a case study of the Australian government's robo-debt program. The paper takes systems thinking and organizational limits perspectives to develop a set of generalizable mechanisms that can benefit investigations of the consequences of algorithmic decision-making. The judges were impressed with the article's clear arguments, focused on a pressing real-world issue and contributions that have practical relevance to organizations worldwide. The authors are not here tonight. The next is the Katie Tucker Medal. And this year's winners are Chaitanya Kaligotla, Enver Yusisan, and Stephen E. Chick. The award is given in recognition of the most outstanding contribution to the philosophy, theory, or practice of the general simulation. The Tucker Medal is awarded biennially, and this particular award relates to work published in the 2021-2022 editions. And I'm pleased to acknowledge that Keith Tucker's daughter and grandson are here this evening to help us celebrate the award. We happily award the medal to Chaitanya, to Enver, and then Stephen. The paper considers the dynamics of communications on social media, namely the spread of competing rumors, the impact of micro-level agent interactions on macro-level outcomes is investigated for two competing rumors, and heuristics for countering the spread of unfavorable rumors are proposed. The judges believe the subject matter of the paper is of wide interest in this time of false news. They found the investigation was well explained and met the aim of the authors to broaden the understanding of a complex social phenomenon. The paper is an outstanding example of the practical use of agents-based modeling to provide insight in a real-world complex system. I'd like to invite Chaitanya up to collect the award on behalf of the team. Now move to the Griffiths Medal, and this year's winners are Paul Harper, Joshua Moore, and Thomas Woolley. The Griffiths Medal is awarded in recognition of the most outstanding contribution to the philosophy, theory, or practice in the health systems journal. The medal is awarded biannually, and this particular award relates to work published in the 2021-2022 editions. We happily award the Griffiths Medal to Paul, Joshua, and Thomas for their paper, COVID-19 Transmission Modeling of Students Returning Home from University. The authors of this paper are to be commended for their excellent work, which exemplifies the theory and practice of health systems research. The judges thought the paper was excellent in several important ways. Firstly, it represents a swift mobilization of existing expertise to a new and urgent application during the COVID-19 pandemic. The practical extension of data modeling used and the dissemination of this knowledge. Secondly, the paper conveys its technical content in a way that is accessible and informative to general readers with a background in health systems, both academic researchers and health government leaders, meaning that key ideas can be shared beyond the context of universities. Furthermore, at a time of great social need, the researchers worked at high speed to put their existing knowledge base to the broader service of many for the public good. This is evidenced in the timing of the publication, the real-time engagement with policy making in Wales, and the distribution of open source code and downloadable app that can be used to replicate their results and furthermore to estimate secondary infections in other contexts and locations. The author's analysis of likely secondary household infection rates as students return home from university was shared with the Welsh government and the Wales Higher Education COVID-19 Tax and Finish Group. It helped inform policy for the 2-week October to November fire break in Wales in 2020 and supported later policy developments aimed at mitigating the effects of large-scale student movements at the end of term. This work has made a clear contribution to helping decision makers in Wales to understand and anticipate some of the likely effects of these movements on communities and their health services. I'd like Paul, Joshua, and Thomas to come up and receive this year's Griffiths Medal. We now move to this year's President Medal. And the winners are Adam Mackenzie Jones, Adam Stannard, Beth Green, Charlie Stewart, Katie Grono, Mary McKee, and Yadwinder Sidhu. The President's Medal is awarded for the best account of successful OR practice entered for the competition and presented at the Society's annual conference. This year's presentation was on the Net Zero Strategy Directorate at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, and the work was led by Adam. And of course, Net Zero Systems 2, NZST for use in government departments. The President Medal has been awarded for a government project that combined technical expertise in a tool that delivered various applications. It has been seen through to implementation in supporting planning and policy making. Tackling the complex challenge of achieving net zero emissions targets requires collaborative efforts across various government departments. To help decision makers better understand and navigate this intricate landscape, Adam and his team collaborated with several other government departments, including DFT, DEFRA, Cabinet Office, and ULUHC, to design and create an innovative interactive visualization tool using systems approach, known as the Net Zero Systems tool, NZST. The NZST is helping decision-making to understand and navigate the interconnected nature of this landscape, enabling the identification of opportunities and driving further collaboration across government. It complements other tools and models that policy professionals and analysts alike use. A mix of hard and software techniques are used to develop the tool. The combination of process excellence, technical challenge, impressive impact, and the tool's longevity made this project a worthwhile winner in the judges' eyes, mirroring the audience's sentiment when the work was presented at the annual conference. We are immensely proud to recognize the exceptional contribution of Adam and his team to the field of operational research. This work exemplifies the mission of the OR Society, which has been at the forefront of advancing the discipline for 75 years. I'd like to invite Adam Stannard, Beth, Charlie, Katie, Mary, and Yadwinder to come up and collect this year's President's Medal. And the final award is our doctoral award. And this year's winner is Spiridon Pugakiotis, given for the most distinguished body of research leading to the award of a doctorate in the field of OR at a UK university. The thesis of Spiridon's research is in the general area of numerical optimization and focuses on interior point methods for solving linear, complex, quadratic, and semi-definite programming methods. This is an important area of research because many practical applications require multiple convex optimization problems to be solved as sub-problems. There's an extensive citation on our website, and I encourage you to read that. The external examiner of Spiridon's thesis commented about being very impressed by the quality of his academic writing and his contributions to the field of numerical optimization. The supervisor states that Spiridon, by far, is the most talented PhD student he has supervised and expects him to become a future leader in the world of research. The main findings of the thesis have been published as 7 papers in high-quality journals. And these papers have received a total of 37 citations, which is remarkable considering that only 18 months have passed since the PhD viva. Well done, Spiridon. Please come up. Now move to the main part of tonight's proceedings, and that's the Blackett Lecture. As I mentioned, we have 3 eminent speakers. So what we have is each speaker will come, as I think Seb mentioned this, talk to us, and then we'll have a panel for questions. So I'll introduce our first speaker, so Dr. Roger Fuldaff, originally a chemist, crystallographer with his first degree and doctorate from Cambridge. Roger started his operational research career in 1974 when he joined the Ministry of Defense at a Defense Operational Analysis Establishment at West Byfleet in Surrey. He subsequently held a variety of posts both in MOD scientific establishments and in Whitehall, most of which were concerned in one way or another with OR to support defense decision makers. In 1995, he was appointed chief analyst of the Center for Defense Analysis and continued to play a similar role within the Defense Science and Technology Laboratory. He retired from the ministry in 2010. He's a fellow of the Operational Research Society and at various times served as one of its 2 vice presidents, served as a treasurer, and as chair of its Heads of OR Groups Committee. In 2006, the society elected him a companion of operational research for his sustained support and encouragement for the development of OR, while in 2010, he chaired the society's annual conference. Over the years, he was a member of numerous OR-related advisory boards and was, to his vague discomfort, probably the only non-mathematician to serve on the EPRSRC Mathematics Strategic Advisory Team. In retirement, Roger is involved with 1 or 2 voluntary activities in the Guildford area. He dabbles in classical languages and, together with his wife, pursues an active interest in wildlife, both in the UK and abroad. As a result, he spends too much of his time in front of the computer, attempting to make his bird photographs presentable enough to illustrate the occasional talks which he gives to local group. Please join me in welcoming Roger.
Okay, thank you, Gilbert. Thanks for inviting me to be the ghost of our OR past. In that capacity, I'd like to ponder the question, do the roots of OR matter? Or more specifically, do they still matter? And by roots here, I mean the origins and development of operational research under that name before and after World War II. Now, if the wartime history had not come about, then I'm sure that the endeavours that we now label OR would still very much be with us, but not necessarily brigaded under one name, and quite possibly with different antecedents, different traditions, different connections to other disciplines. So what impact did the wartime roots actually have? Are those influences still with us? And are they beneficial? And where did we, as time went on, have to take new turnings? Well, of course, the first legacy of OR's wartime roots is one that we've continued to fret about almost ever since, and that's the name. Without the particular origins, I mean, we can be pretty sure that it, whatever it might now be, would not be called operational research. So let's recollect the origins of the name. Excuse me. The context was the urgent need to improve the air defence of Britain in the run-up to World War II. Britain was already building fighter aircraft, Hurricanes and Spitfires, as fast as it could. The problem was in detecting and pinpointing incoming bomber raids at sufficient range to allow fighters to be brought to bear. And as we all know, a solution was found in the new technology of radar. As war approached, radar's technical performance was very encouraging. But it soon became clear that a good deal of work needed to be done in understanding how the whole air defence system should be tied together. Fighters, radar stations, control rooms, communication systems. And this was explored in experiments and exercises from 1936 onwards. And the key point is that scientists from the radar community came out of their labs and worked closely with RAF officers in analysing the exercises, identifying problems, and proposing organisation and procedural solutions. In other words, operational research was conducted to complement the technical research that continued to support the underlying technology. And so the term operational research came into use in about 1938. And however much we sort of discussed it in the years since, at the time, it was a very natural and meaningful term. Now, when war broke out, a small team of scientists was deployed to the headquarters of RAF Fighter Command at Stanmore. And it fairly soon became formally labelled the Operational Research Section Fighter Command. And it's been estimated that radar improved the effectiveness of our air defence in the Battle of Britain by a factor of 5, and that OR doubled that again. Arguably, since the Battle of Britain was a relatively close-run thing, that was a potentially nation-saving achievement. Now, the value of the work done at Fighter Command was widely recognised, and from 1940 onwards, OR groups formed rapidly throughout the British Armed Forces. And this slide shows a timeline. The key figure in this expansion was, as we all know, Patrick Blackett, whose name obviously we're commemorating today. And he was responsible for forming groups successively in all 3 services, as I've highlighted here. In 1939, Blackett was 42 years old. He was a professor of physics at the University of Manchester and had already been a fellow of the Royal Society for 6 years. So his scientific credentials were therefore impeccable. And of course, they were enhanced after the war by the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1948. But importantly, also, he had served as a junior officer in the Royal Navy throughout the First World War and had seen action in the Battle of Jutland. And this experience led to a deep and continuing interest in the relationship between science and defence. Since 1935, he had been a member of the government committee that had recommended radar as the way ahead for Britain's air defence. And although not directly involved in OR work for Fighter Command, he would have been well aware of it. His direct involvement with OR began in August 1940. He was asked to become scientific advisor to Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Pyle, Commander-in-Chief of the Army's Anti-Aircraft Command. This command ran ground-based anti-aircraft guns as part of the overall air defence system. Once again, the problem was working out how guns, gun-laying radars and operators should be integrated into an effective total system. Blackett put together a small group, which I'm sure you all already heard, was nicknamed Blackett Circus, with a remarkably eclectic mix of personnel. And I've listed them there. And that's a point I'll come back to later. They did the job so effectively that when Blackett was called away to RAF Coastal Command in March 41, General Pyle complained that they've stolen my magician. But post-Blackett, the group continued to thrive and in due course expanded to become an operational research group supporting the Army as a whole. For the rest of the war, Blackett was involved in what had become now the most pressing problem in Britain's defence effort. This was the defence of the crucial North Atlantic supply lines against German submarines, the U-boats. In other words, the Battle of the Atlantic. Blackett was therefore asked to form an operational research section at RAF Coastal Command, which was responsible for airborne anti-submarine patrols, at somewhat greater range, actually, than the name Coastal Command would suggest. And about a year later, to establish and run an overall OR effort for the Royal Navy. And it was in support of the Battle of the Atlantic where some of the outstanding examples of wartime OR were accomplished. Once again, every part of the system was examined and improved, from the nitty-gritty of depth charge settings to the optimum size of convoys. But all the groups that I listed earlier had major achievements to their credit. Sir John Slessor, later Chief of the Air Staff, summed it up after the war when he wrote that an operational research section is an absolutely indispensable component of the operational and administrative planning staff of any big command. A remarkable tribute. Now, I would certainly not argue that the use of scientific or other analytical methods to support decision makers was an entirely new wartime invention. But I think I would argue that the war provided a hothouse in which that concept developed far faster than it would have done in the same few years from alternative routes. And no doubt developed with some different characteristics, which we'll come to. When the war ended, there was a natural desire by those involved to migrate OR to the civilian sphere, especially to improve Britain's industrial productivity and export performance, which was a pressing need in the immediate post-war years. Blackett was certainly among those advocating post-war adoption of OR, but it was largely from the sidelines. He returned to academic life as a physicist and was much exercised on issues such as Britain's nuclear policy, which did not make him very popular with the post-war Labour government, but I guess that's another story. The most energetic and effective post-war advocate for OR was undoubtedly Sir Charles Goodeve. And we've already heard his name with the Goodeve Medal. Goodeve was a Canadian-born physical chemist who by 1943 had become the Admiralty's Deputy Controller for Research and Development, which of course had brought him into close contact with Blackett. He'd become convinced of the value of operational research and entirely set about persuading others. And this quote from Maurice Kirby's book sums it up. He mounted what was tantamount to a one-man campaign in favour of OR via speeches and articles in which he underlined wartime successes and pointed to a variety of peacetime uses. But as well as an effective advocate, and this is very important, he was personally able to make OR happen in the civil sector, which was very necessary, since from some quarters there was a good deal of pushback as to whether there was anything new in this so-called operational research. In 1945, he was appointed director of the British Iron and Steel Research Association and energetically set about embedding OR in his organisation, from where it spread to the steel industry as a whole. And so was founded the first industrial OR group. I cannot mention Charles Goodeve without recalling that it was he who convened the meeting that led to the formation of the OR Club in 1948, which is what we're celebrating today in a way. And he was also instrumental in the founding of OR Quarterly, the predecessor to our journal. OR in steel was closely followed by OR in coal. And here the prime mover was Sir Charles Ellis. He was Professor of Physics at King's College London, but crucially, during the war, he'd been scientific advisor to the Army Council. He too was in no doubt as to the value of OR. In 1946, he was appointed a science member of the newly formed National Coal Board and was determined that OR would play its part in the post-war coal industry. And from 1948 onwards, initially under the name of the Field Investigation Group, the Coal Board OR Group was, for many years, the shining exemplar of British OR. There's no doubt that without the commitment of senior, well-placed figures who played an important role in the war, such as Goodeve and Ellis, the momentum built up during the war years might well have dissipated. And of course, one mustn't forget the large pool of experienced personnel from whom the new groups could be formed. Thereafter, diffusion into other industrial and commercial sectors proceeded, I think, at a steady pace, albeit with some ups and downs and false starts on the way. Became established in civil government in the 1960s. And the 1950s and 60s also saw the establishment of OR teaching and research in the universities, with senior practitioners playing a major role. Academia aside, though, it's probably only fair to point out here that the migration of OR into the civilian sphere was effectively the replacement of one set of executive customers by another. In due course, concepts such as community OR would have to find their own genesis without any launchpad provided by the wartime experience. Did the wartime experience actually hold back alternative developments that didn't fit this model? I don't know. I'm not sure I have enough history behind me to know, but I'd be interested in people's views. But okay, let's look at some of the more specific influences that the experience did exert. First, organisation. Based on his Coastal Command experience, Blackett had clear views on how an OR section should be organised, shown here. Let's translate this into the non-military environment, bullet by bullet. We would say OR should be done in an OR group, which should be an integral part of the organisation it serves. It should work in the closest collaboration with the rest of that organisation. and have direct knowledge of what goes on at the sharp end. Crucially, the head of the group should be directly responsible to the most senior level in the organisation. And as well as responding to directions, the group should have the freedom, indeed the duty, to identify important but neglected issues. In many respects, this sums up what in post-war years was seen as the gold standard for the way that OR should be organised. As time went by, though, the model seemed to be breaking down in too many instances, and this gave rise to much concern. But of course, there are other models, for example, the external consultancy model, or the diffusion of OR expertise throughout the organisation generally. And both of these have their advantages and their potential downsides. So was it primarily a legacy of wartime that led to us seeing this model as the ideal? Or were we in fact right to worry about other models usurping it? Definitely scope for debate there. Let's talk about people. Again, we can quote Blackett. Here, Blackett's views on the qualifications needed by OR workers. The very first OR group at Fighter Command was, of course, composed of physicists and engineers from the radar community. But as OR spread through the armed forces, a wider range of scientific disciplines became involved. Physiologists and biologists, as well as physicists and mathematicians. And Blackett's circus was, of course, the first and prime example of this. Now, okay, this may have come about because so many physical scientists have been co-opted into technical research work. But it was soon found that a variety of backgrounds was a considerable strength. And obviously that's reflected in the words that Blackett used in the first bullet here. And I'm sure we wouldn't quibble with the second and third bullets, especially the third. Now, as long as we accept a broad definition of the term scientific discipline, to include mathematics in general, engineering and so on, the first bullet here reflects the predominant pattern of recruitment to the OR profession ever since. And of course, a very wide recruitment base it is. And it's led to lots of, and of course, a very wide recruitment base it is. And it's led to lots of bright young people coming on board for, we hope, stimulating and rewarding careers. A key legacy of the wartime roots, in my view, since developments of analytical support to decision makers from different pre-war antecedents may well not have led us down the same path. Whether there's been a downside in keeping other disciplines such as economics and sociology rather at arm's length, well, another interesting point for debate. What about methods? Methods and techniques. On the whole, the wartime experience didn't bequeath to its peacetime successors a toolbox of shiny new methods or techniques. The SOR was seen as an essentially quantitative discipline. But beyond that, it was more a philosophy and a general confidence in applying the methods of science for new purposes, using whatever approach matched the problem in hand. And this pragmatic and eclectic approach, I think, has continued to this day. As we know, many new analytical techniques have come onto the scene in the last 75 years. And regardless of origin, they've been enthusiastically embraced by the OR community. I think in no small part this reflects the wartime tradition of simply asking, is it useful? Avoiding the closed shop approach as to what OR is and is not. I guess one effect of this is that all these methods and techniques have continued to march together under the one banner of OR, so to speak. And that's allowed them to be applied and taught within a single coherent intellectual framework of process and philosophy, which I think we'll all agree must be a pretty good thing. All that said, a conscious break from the wartime roots was needed to extend this tradition to embrace non-quantitative methods. As we know, in the 1970s, it began to be recognized that OR was falling into a trap, that it was focusing too exclusively on mathematically tractable but secondary issues, whilst many real-world issues were altogether more messy, with dynamic and multiply interconnected factors and a range of stakeholders with differing aims and perspectives. The result was, of course, the development and use of so-called soft methods. Yeah, I mean, certainly a good example of OR embracing new approaches when they were seen to be needed, but nevertheless a distinct move away from the broader wartime legacy. And then another one of the debatable questions which I raised, did that legacy hold up this development, or was it simply a matter of coming to it in due time? The final topic I want to mention is the international dimension. OR did not stay a purely UK brand for very long, since it quickly spread to wartime allies across the Atlantic and later even to the Pacific. In particular, the US became aware of British developments in OR even before they entered the war in December 41. And they liked what they saw, and in the course of 1942, OR groups under various names began to be established in the US military. And by the time the war ended, operations research, as they called it, was very well established and developed fast, especially in their universities. Americans began to add many new techniques to the OR toolbox. And by the mid-1950s, British practitioners realized that they needed to catch up. Other countries had already started to take an interest, and of course Canada and Australia had been on board almost from the beginning. And so it was in 1955, the Americans proposed holding a first international conference on OR, a proposal that was certainly welcomed enthusiastically by the UK and indeed the OR Society. The resulting event was held in Oxford in 1957. It was jointly organised by the OR Society and its American equivalents. And it was attended by 242 delegates from 20 countries. Now, although some national representations were really quite small, these were remarkable figures. Little more than 10 years after the war, what had started as a fairly specialised activity in wartime Britain was now an internationally recognised brand. And of course, this conference was the precursor to the triennial IFORS conferences. So the OR name is now recognised worldwide with high levels of activity to match. And I would say that the speed and extent of this internationalisation must surely owe a great deal to OR's initial transatlantic leap in the hothouse of war. And so, do the wartime roots of operational research still matter? Well, I've highlighted a number of areas, the name, of course, and the hothouse effect of the war in almost turbocharging the idea of scientific or analytical support to decision makers. I've suggested, or at least hypothesized, subsequent influences on the organisation, people, and methods of OR, and on its rapid development as an international discipline. So is there one continuing influence that I would pick out? Well, I guess from a personal perspective, it's the people aspect. And the OR tradition has shown that men and women from a wide range of scientific and mathematical backgrounds can very successfully use their training and skills in an analytical way to help people and organisations make better decisions, and that this can make for a rewarding and engaging career. And as an ex-chemist and crystallographer, that's how I come to be standing here today. Thank you.
Well, I invite Paul Clark, our second speaker. So just a brief bio. So in November 2020, Paul stepped down as Chief Technology Officer at Ocado, where he had held or had led the sharp end of their innovation factory for many years, cooking with the cauldron of disruptive technologies, including data, AI, IoT, synthetic environments, digital twins, robotics, smart machines, and living labs. Paul is passionate about the recipes for successful inventions, innovation, and disruption, which, in his experience, are all about embracing non-linearity, mess, uncertainty, intersectional thinking, unconventionality, intuition, and leaps of faith. He believes building a successful innovation factory is all about people, culture, creativity, leadership, and vision, rather than just the underlying technologies. And he has spent much of his career being a piece of destructive grit in a number of different oysters, trying to help people see what they can't see and trying to inspire teams to do things they never dreamed possible. Paul now sits on a number of government and industry advisory boards, including the Robotics Growth Partnership and Health Data UK, Research UK, whilst at the same time advising a growing portfolio of exciting startups. He was a member of the UK's AI Council, the Innovation Experts Group that fed into the UK Innovation Strategy, and an advisor to the National Food Strategy. Please help me welcome Paul.
Good evening. So I think I better start with an apology to say that I'm here under false pretenses tonight on two counts. First of all, unlike all of you, I am not deeply steeped in operational research in terms of my background, but also I'm not sure I'm really going to answer the exam question of operational research present. But on the other hand, this is certainly not going to be the first time that I've not done what I've told. But anyway, there are a number of technological strands running through my career, some of which Gilbert has mentioned. AI, data, smart machines. But undoubtedly, I think probably the most consistent and strongest one has been modeling. For me, modeling is a transformative technology. I don't think you disagree on that. And it can be applied to almost every area, from subatomic particles to synthetic cells, to smart machines, to political movements, to planetary systems and beyond. And it can be used to ideate, design, and test new systems and products. It can be used to understand and visualize behaviors, to optimize complex systems of systems, and to explore, which is very much my area, the intersectional dark matter that lies between what we think we know, to unpick the past, to predict the future, and so much more. And for me, modeling in all of its forms, and hence this image, is the philosopher's stone, unlocking the alchemical interactions between different technologies, strategies, missions, and systems. However, in my experience of working with government and industry, the power of modeling, in my experience, is often grossly misunderstood and undervalued, despite the fact that we have such deep need of it now to help us tackle the growing list of exponential challenges and opportunities that we face as a country and as a species. And indeed, when you mention modeling to people with a technical background, their minds often jump to digital twins. And it's true that digital twins are in the zeitgeist at the moment, but it's also true that they are massively misunderstood and they mean very different things to different people. Digital twins, for me, are a member of a wider family of the synthetic environment family of technologies, so simulations, emulations, visualizations, digital shadows, and digital twins. And I suspect many of you will be incredibly familiar with all of those members of the family, but for any of you who aren't, I feel I just need to sort of lay out my definitions with a quick example. So imagine you want to optimize the flow of traffic around an area of London. You'd probably start by adding cameras and sensors to the roads and the junctions to collect data on the flows of vehicles and people and cats and congestion and roadworks and pollution levels and so on. And you might then build a simulation of the road network, the traffic lights, the cars and the people in order to understand their current behaviors and to model your potential interventions. And to train and validate this simulation, you then stream all those data from the cameras and sensors to the cloud and from there into your model. And in my taxonomy, you've now created a digital shadow, which you could use to run studies to optimize things like the timing of the traffic lights, the impact of roadworks, and the topology of alternative road layouts. And you might build a visualization of the road network to bring to life both the real-world data coming from all those sensors and cameras, but also the outcomes of your simulation studies. But then you might update the timing of the actual traffic lights with the optimized settings coming from your digital shadow. And now, with that bidirectional coupling, you have turned your digital shadow into a true digital twin. And I haven't included emulations in this example, but we're going to come to those soon enough. Unfortunately, people now refer to almost any kind of digital representation of a physical entity as being a digital twin. But for me, it is that predictive capability of the simulation and the bidirectional coupling with its physical twin that makes a true digital twin. Synthetic environments live at the intersection of our digital and physical worlds. They provide the connective tissue between those two worlds. And some of the most exciting applications of synthetic environments for me emerge when you couple them with their digital and physical neighbors. In terms of coupling within the digital world, synthetic environments enable AIs to explore our physical world, to gather data and understand physical processes and behaviors. For example, we've seen recently how Google's new AI weather forecasting models can be combined with conventional weather forecasting simulations and physics engines in order to make faster predictions. Synthetic environments can be used to create virtual test beds and living labs for AIs in order to stress test them to explore their intended and unintended behaviors before they're released into the wild. And synthetic environments can be used to generate synthetic data to help train AIs before the real data exists. And indeed, at Ocado, we use simulations to generate synthetic data for swarms of robots before the real robots existed in order to help train their machine learning-based control systems. And in terms of coupling with the physical world, synthetic environments play a crucial role in the engineering life cycle of many complex machines and systems. So let's take the example of a modern jet engine. High-level conceptual designs of the engine will be explored within digital simulations. The design of individual components will then be modeled in greater detail, including testing things like digital representations of components such as turbine blades within digital wind tunnels. Simulation models, as you well know, model the behaviors of real-world entities without worrying too much about precisely how they work under the bonnet. Simulations can be run much faster than real time, for example, subjecting an engine design to a year's worth of operating conditions in a much shorter time period. And most simulations contain stochastic parameters and events, which mean that every time you run them, you get slightly different results. And running a simulation, obviously, many times in a Monte Carlo study carves out an envelope of the predicted results. On the other hand, emulations are much higher fidelity models that represent the inner workings of the entity and have to worry about things like friction, gravity, the statistical deviation of components from their theoretical behaviors, and so on. Emulations have to model the precise timing and synchronization of events so they normally have to run in lockstep with real time. And the objective is to make an emulation such a precise replica of the physical entity that related systems, such as the control software of the engine, that has no idea that it's not running on or talking to the real hardware. And once you have a working, validated emulation of the complete entity, you can start incrementally replacing digital models of components with the real components. For example, you might replace the emulation of a maintenance panel with the physical panel in order to enable engineers and human factor specialists to interact with it. This is hardware-in-the-loop emulation and allows you to move incrementally from a fully digital model to an operational physical system. And once the jet engine is in service within a real aircraft, real-time sensing data from the engine can be streamed back to the emulation or simulation, which will now have evolved into a digital shadow. And this enables engineers to do things like predictive maintenance and testing software updates before they're deployed to the actual engine. And if the digital shadow is then allowed to communicate with the control systems of the real engine, potentially whilst the aircraft is in flight, it has become a true digital twin. Now, companies like Ocado are using synthetic environments to enable virtual robots to explore and learn strategies for picking and packing products before testing these with physical robots in living labs. And companies like Toyota are taking a different approach, allowing a kindergarten of robots to discover these strategies powered by what they're calling AI large behavioral models as opposed to large language models. At Ocado, we built simulations of our automated warehouses, our fleets of delivery vans, and other parts of our e-commerce fulfillment and logistics platforms, and which then evolved into digital twins. And the latter were used to optimize the performance and economics of our platforms, both for our UK retail business and the international customers of that platform. And if you're interested in a longer delve into Ocado's journey with synthetic environments, you can find a blog I wrote in 2020, so slightly out of date now, for the data-centric engineering department at Cambridge. Just go to the Cambridge Core blog website and search for Paul Clark. Now, choosing the best approach for building a model used to be relatively straightforward. You might have asked yourself questions such as, can I fully describe the system with a set of mathematical equations? Do I want to model the component parts with a simulation or emulation? And if so, which simulation architecture is the best fit for my problem? For example, discrete event simulation, agent-based modeling, or dynamic system modeling? Or does the complexity of my model require specialist modeling techniques such as finite element analysis? These are all examples of white box models. However, advances in machine learning techniques have created new opportunities for using the underlying data from the system to train black box models. The advantage of AI-based modeling is that you don't need to understand the internal workings and complexities of the system. But there are disadvantages too. For example, you can't train your model without the data, so not much use if you're trying to model something that doesn't exist yet. You typically need a huge amount of training data. And the lack of explainability in the fact that if you modify your system, your AI model may well struggle to predict its new behaviors without being retrained. If we think of these choices as colors on a palette, engineers are increasingly blending these colors to come up with new ones. For example, embedding machine learning models within traditional operational research models, embedding machine learning models within simulations to model areas of complexity they don't need to understand just to predict, thus creating gray box models. As mentioned earlier, connecting simulations to AIs to enable them to understand how things work, behave, and interact. Filtering the creative juices of generative AI models through classical AI technologies such as rules engines that can enforce constraints such as laws and regulations. Embedding simulations within real-time control systems to model the best interventions after exceptions occur in order to get back to a steady state. Now, as has been touched on already, the pandemic was a stern tutor. It taught us how, as humans, we really struggle with the concept of exponential change, slow at first and then overwhelming. Our brains are programmed for linear change, and they struggle with concepts such as the R number and how it describes the exponential spread of a virus. We're seeing the same challenge play out with climate change, where the longer we wait on the sidelines, crippled by the lack of first-mover advantage for individuals, companies, and nation-states, not only will we have less time to intervene, but the complexity and cost of those interventions will grow exponentially too. The pandemic taught us how we didn't have all the smart machines we needed to do things like safely clean hospital red zones, for the configurable manufacturing of critical supplies like PPE, for automating the scalable distribution of those supplies, and so on. And the longer gestation cycles of smart machines and the fact that the supply chains for their components were shut down meant that we couldn't respond fast enough. It taught us about all the data we didn't have at our fingertips to help us understand how the virus was spreading, how the public services and national infrastructure were operating, how our citizens were behaving, and in particular, we were missing many of the real-time data feeds in those areas. And finally, it taught us about the fidelity and diversity of the models that we were missing to predict how the virus might spread, how citizens might be behaving, how citizens might respond to interventions such as lockdowns, and so on. Now, Peter Drucker was right when he famously said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." But I would assert that the pandemic demonstrated that agility eats planning for lunch. The black swans that we plan for may not be the ones we get. And so we need agility to respond to the unexpected and the unknown unknowns. And we need better tools to deliver that agility. And for me, data, modeling, AI, smart machines are at the top of the tools shopping list. So have we learnt those lessons? I fear not. If you listen to the public speeches at the COP summits, they barely talk about collaborating on better data, and I have heard no talk about collaborating on better tools. Now, a senior government official once asked me this question: "Paul, how would you explain a big picture vision to a government minister who's struggling to understand it?" Welcome to my life. Based upon what I've already said, you won't be surprised that my answer was, I've built a simulation to model the vision and a visualization to bring it to life. And together, these provide an interactive and immersive environment that stakeholders can explore and get answers to what-if questions, challenge assumptions, and so on. Infinitely more powerful and persuasive than a static, one-dimensional business case or PowerPoint deck. More controversially, I believe that all forms of public funding, from big national infrastructure projects to much smaller innovation competition grants, should commence with a separately funded simulation phase to explore whether the venture has legs, and if so, to unlock the main funding. Building such a simulation forces you to explore your ideas in greater detail. It forces you to collect the data required to build it, and it can accompany the product or service throughout its lifetime to de-risk decision-making, to optimize solutions, and to potentially evolve into a digital twin, and so on. Personally, I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning without simulating it first. So why aren't we building more and better models? Well, for me, many organizations, these models are like exotic wild animals. They don't know where to get them from. They don't understand their ecosystems. They have little idea about their behaviors and what they can and cannot do. They lack the competencies to look after them properly. They don't know how to feed them, what to feed them with, and how to train them, and so on. So I believe we need to domesticate these models, particularly the digital twins, which are arguably the most exotic members of that family, so that they are within the reach of all organizations, not just the zookeepers and circus trainers such as Ocado, Arup, Rolls-Royce, and SpaceX. And the solution to this includes assembling an open-source Lego set and ecosystem of shared components, tools, frameworks, templates, and platforms to lower the bar for building and owning these domesticated and democratized models faster, with less cost, risk, and expertise. However, the real power of these models comes when you connect them together. For example, connecting the digital twins of an aircraft engine, its airframe, its control surfaces, and so on, to create a digital twin of the entire aircraft. Then connecting digital twins of aircraft, airlines, air traffic control systems, airports, and many others to create a digital twin of the aviation sector. adding in digital twins of the roads, railways, and seaports in order to create a digital twin of the transportation system, adding in digital twins of the energy network, logistics networks, consumer demand, and so on. And if we were to keep going on this journey, you would eventually assemble a digital twin of the UK. And that's the vision of the National Digital Twin Programme, which, although massively scaled down now, sadly, from its original aspirations due to lack of funding, is still focused on that mission. And the next step would be planetary digital twins. Indeed, a growing number of organizations and crazies such as myself are proposing that we should build digital twins, or at least digital shadows to be precise, of our planet to help us better understand our environmental systems and reduce the impact of our man-made systems upon them. Now, Rutherford famously said that all science is either physics or stamp collecting. And whilst that statement is arguably true, as a physicist, I would be the first to say that it's rather unhelpful. Sorry, Rutherford. Clearly, if you're interested in understanding the behavior of people, populations, and even countries, you're not going to do this by modeling them at a subatomic level. You need levels of approximation and abstraction, otherwise called social sciences. Similarly, when you build a synthetic environment, you have to strike a balance between the accuracy and complexity. You have to make decisions about the level of granularity, fidelity, and abstraction at which you will build your model. For example, if you want to model the microclimate of a forest, your component models might be at the level of individual trees and plants, but not at the level of individual plant cells, let alone their constituent parts. Building these Earth twins will require us to stitch together digital twins horizontally and vertically, digital twins that will have been built by different organizations with different technologies at different levels of fidelity and abstraction and for different purposes. Now, synthetic environments enable us to construct entire virtual worlds. An example of this are platforms like Minecraft and Roblox, or video games like Grand Theft Auto. All the actors in that game, such as the people, the weapons, the cars, and so on, are individually modeled, and physics engines make sure that they all move and behave in realistic ways. These virtual worlds are so sophisticated that autonomous vehicle manufacturers often use them to test their software. Before the current AI hysteria kicked off, there was a lot of chatter about the concept of a metaverse. Virtual worlds in which people might meet, shop, hang out with friends, earn money, and so on. The large technology companies and hyperscalers have different and often competing visions for what these virtual worlds might look like and the services they would provide. But in general, they're about harvesting our data and generating revenue. What I think is potentially much more exciting is the possibility of using such worlds as immersive spaces for learning, collaborative innovation, and problem solving, and with access to greater diversity of thought, skills, and experience, what social media could have been. I also believe these virtual worlds could have an important role to play in tackling climate change. Some of you may be old enough to remember a game called SimCity that allowed you to model and optimize the way a virtual city worked. Well, SimEarth games could help drive greater understanding of the climate impact of the personal decisions we make as citizens, to nudge our behaviors, to educate, and to help citizens escape from the rabbit in the headlights paralysis and overcome that lack of first mover advantage that I referred to earlier. Now, switching context, we all know how to bake a cake, don't we? You put your ingredients into a baking tin like this that has got separate compartments for the eggs, the flour, the milk, the butter, the sultanas, and so on, and then you pop it in the oven. Obviously not. Instead, you follow a recipe, blending the ingredients together as they mix. Their properties change, and new flavors and textures are created as they react with one another. Similarly, the transformative power of technologies such as AI, synthetic environments, and smart machines, and many others, is unlocked when they're blended together, and yet our education system, our research funding, our institutions, our government strategies, and so on, do their damnedest to keep them separated and siloed, like the compartments in this tin. Indeed, it's telling that in the UK, we have no institutions like MIT Media Lab, Bell Labs, Xerox PARC, or the Santa Fe Institute that are focused on intersectional thinking and exploration. Transformative innovation for me, as Gilbert said, is like great cooking. It's all about the ingredients, so the technologies, the competencies, the talent, and so forth, the utensils, the tools, the infrastructure, the ecosystems, and the building blocks, and the recipes, the ways of thinking and doing, the culture, the leadership, and the vision. In my experience, people obsess about the ingredients, pay little attention to the utensils, and the recipes are overlooked. And yet the real alchemy occurs when you work at all three levels simultaneously. And this alchemy is at the heart of the vision for cyber-physical infrastructure that was authored by the Robotics Growth Partnership that I co-chair, published by the UK government in February 22, and launched by the then Science Minister, George Freeman. You'll be pleased to hear I don't have time this evening to talk about this vision in detail, but you can find it online if you want to, along with a write-up of the government consultation exercise that followed by searching for cyber-physical infrastructure on gov.uk. You won't be surprised to discover that harnessing the power of synthetic environments and modeling is a critically important strand running through this vision. Put simply, this vision is about building a better Lego set for the UK and hopefully the planet to transform the way we innovate all manner of products, public services, and national infrastructure faster, with less waste, cost, and risk, and with greater interoperability, resilience, sustainability, and competitive advantage. And one of the things we need to do to help stakeholders grasp the potential power of cyber-physical infrastructure is to model it and visualize it first. Now, someone once shared a powerful analogy with me. Carl Benz patented the car in 1886, and over the next 100 years, there were continual improvements to the designs of cars and engines until these started to eventually plateau. The next big leap in efficiency and performance came from embedding intelligence into cars, and a modern car now contains maybe 100 embedded CPUs. They made the point to me that the same is true of our cities, because there's only so much we can do to physically improve or re-engineer existing, often ancient streets and buildings, but by embedding intelligence into them, we can transform how they behave. I believe this analogy is very relevant to tackling climate change. We can help make our world more sustainable by embedding connected smartness, collaboration, modeling, and optimization at every level into our products and services, our homes, our offices, our cities, our public services, our national infrastructure, our countries, and the planet itself. But as I talked about in a LinkedIn article that you can find, I believe we need to go much further. The digital twins of our planet and our man-made systems I mentioned earlier could be a stepping stone towards something even bigger, namely building a federated planetary operating system to help us optimize how we run our planet for the benefit of all of its inhabitants. I believe the human race needs to stop behaving like a bunch of squabbling tenants who haven't been looking after the building properly and who are now surprised they're facing eviction. Instead, we need to turn that building into a smart, self-managing, self-optimizing, self-maintaining, sustainable ecosystem. And to do that, I believe we need that planetary operating system. We need a new Lego set to build the infrastructure it controls, all ideated, designed, built, tested, optimized, and maintained within synthetic environments. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Paul. Now, I'd like to invite our final speaker, Professor Alison Etheridge. Alison is Professor of Probability in the University of Oxford, where she holds a joint position between the Mathematical Institute and the Department of Statistics. She worked and studied at UC Berkeley, Cambridge, Edinburgh, McGill, and Queen Mary University, London. Her research is in probability theory and applications, with a particular focus on mathematical population genetics. She has been especially interested in the effects of spatial structure on patterns of genetic variation and on the interactions between space, natural selection, and the randomness inherent in reproduction in finite populations. Alison has previously served as the president of the Institute of Mathematical Statistics and on the councils of the London Mathematical Society and a Bernoulli Society. She's currently on the Council of EPRSRC, following stints on the Mathematical Strategic Advisory Team and the Strategic Advisory Network and the Royal Society. Alison is currently chair of the Council for the Mathematical Sciences, which brings together the Edinburgh Mathematical Society, the Institute of Mathematics and its applications, the London Mathematical Society, the Operational Research Society, and the Royal Statistical Society. She's also on the Scientific Council of the French CNRS. She was a sub-panel member in each of the RAE 2008 and REF 2014, and was sub-panel chair for the UOA 10, that's the Mathematical Sciences in REF 2021. Please join me to welcome Alison.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether to say I'm going to tell you about a cake that we're trying to bake, or to say that we're trying to construct a wonderful model from the Lego blocks provided by the mathematical sciences community in the UK. But one of those should fit. I, largely because of a dental emergency actually, didn't prepare my own slides. I am doing an equivalent of science karaoke. These are slides lifted from some produced by people who are setting up an academy for the mathematical sciences that I want to tell you about now. But forgive me if they've got a lot of dense material that I then largely ignore. Okay, so there's the strapline for the academy, which we're in the process of producing. As Gilbert said, I'm chair of the Council for the Mathematical Sciences, which brings together all those learned societies. And when I took over as chair in June 2021, I had a handover meeting from Ian Diamond, Sir Ian Diamond, I should say, who was the previous chair. And Ian said, well, I don't think there are many outstanding issues, but there is one small project you might have to pay a bit of attention to. And here is the small project. It's setting up an academy. So what was the origin of this? Well, in 2018, Philip Bond published his review, The Era of Mathematics. And Lord Stern, I think, has a rather lovely quote in the preface to that, which is, this is the era of mathematics. And for mathematics, read mathematical sciences, and that includes operational research. It includes all the topics covered by the Council for the Mathematical Sciences. Indeed, I've spent much of my career trying to stop people saying mathematics, but obviously I didn't get through to Lord Stern in time. But he's right in saying that now really is the time to invest in its future in the UK, and indeed 2018 would have been a good time as well. And one of the principal recommendations of the review that he was writing the preface for was that there should be an academy for the mathematical sciences in the UK. And what's the rationale for that? Well, it's one we've seen repeated elsewhere. If you go and read Paul Nurse's review of the research landscape, recently published, it really comes out with a very cogent argument for why we need academies. We need academies when we have a very fragmented landscape, and the mathematical sciences landscape in the UK is incredibly fragmented. 5 learned societies under the CMS, nothing to the total number of professional and other organisations that are serving mathematical scientists, but doing so in a very fragmented, not a joined-up way. And I rather like, there's a quote from Nurse that I intended to bring with me, but I left my computer elsewhere, which is saying, do not underestimate the power of bringing together different sectors and different communities in a single location, because that is where real innovation and progress is made. So the view of the Bond Review, and indeed of the Council for the Mathematical Sciences in its response to the Bond Review, is that the Royal Academy of Engineering has shown us that real value accrues from a single body connecting education, research, industry, that interacts with government and can help actually generate policy. And that's what an Academy for the Mathematical Sciences will be aiming to do. Okay, so that's the vision, and this basically says we'll do what Paul Nurse says will be a good thing for us to do. The idea is that the Academy will be an authoritative and persuasive voice for the whole of the mathematical sciences, and I keep emphasising that because I think it's really important that we break away from the tradition, certainly when I was being educated, of thinking of these little compartmentalised bits of mathematics and sitting within one of those, because it is no longer true. I don't think we can talk about pure mathematics and applied mathematics, because those of us trained as pure mathematicians are often, well, as Gilbert says, I do population genetics. I'm bringing pure mathematical techniques in the traditional sense of the world to population genetics. Ulrika Tillman, who's somewhere in this world, a topologist by training, can tell you a lot about the Centre for Topological Data Analysis that she set up in Oxford. There are all sorts of ideas that we need to be bringing in from all over, not only mathematical sciences, but social sciences and so on, as we try to attack the big challenges that face us in the 21st century. So the Academy, of course, can't do everything, and it can't be everything to all people, but what it will try to do is work with the existing organisations and those who work with those organisations and create a convening power which will give it an authoritative voice so that it can really talk to government and help in that development of policy and get the mathematical sciences properly embedded into the way that the government thinks about things. Certainly progress has been made. Rishi Sunak's government does say mathematics quite often, but I think I'd like to see some more substance to that. Okay, so where will the Academy sit? There are many academies. It's already quite a busy picture. And you're sitting in, of course, one of the oldest ones in the Royal Society area, Focus the Sciences. We're not competing with the Royal Society. We're going to have mathematicians in the Royal Society forever, but the Royal Society serves a particular purpose. I think the Royal Academy of Engineering is a better model for where the Academy of Mathematical Sciences will wish to sit. There's also, of course, the British Academy, not very far away, really focusing on humanities and social sciences. There are the academies that cross sciences, arts, humanities, social sciences in the devolved nations, and across Ireland, the Royal Irish Academy serves the whole island of Ireland, try saying that. Learned Society of Wales, Royal Society of Edinburgh, but there are these more subject-focused academies, which is where we see ourselves sitting, the Academy for Medical Sciences, the Royal Academy of Engineering already mentioned, Academy of Social Sciences, and there, of course, is Mathematical Sciences right in the middle. Where else would we be? And I mentioned the UK Young Academy. The UK Young Academy, some of you may have heard of. It is what it says on the box. It's a young academy. It crosses all of the subject areas. It's a joint project of the Royal Society, the British Academy, Royal Society of Edinburgh, Royal Irish Academy, Learned Society, all of them. They're all working together on this, Royal Academy of Engineering. It is a huge project which was conducted from within the Royal Society just because that was a good place to run the project, but it is a joint project. And it is getting young people, getting them involved in thinking about their subject area, its role in the UK, how they can influence policy, and how they could be more than just an academic or an educator or somebody working in a particular sector going forward, but can be much more. And the fellows of the Young Academy, they have a fixed term because we don't stay young forever, apparently. The fellows of the Young Academy are elected not only on their excellence, as perceived in whatever environment they're working, but also on their desire to help support the aims of the Academy. That Young Academy was launched in 2022. I hope it is a resounding success. Other countries in Europe all have one, and actually the Scots got there first. They had one as well before this one was set up. But I would like to just have a shout out for the Royal Society because the person who helped set up the Young Academy has also been very helpful to the people who've been trying to set up the Academy for the Mathematical Sciences. And indeed, we've had a lot of support from right across this environment and also from across the learned society. So this is a project sponsored by the Council for Mathematical Sciences. It isn't a project to take over the learned societies that sit within that. It isn't really even a project to replace the Council for the Mathematical Sciences, although I am famous in the University of Oxford for having chaired the Value for Money Committee and concluded that the best value for money would be achieved by dissolving the Value for Money Committee and therefore doing myself out of a job. So this is part of my aim, obviously, but the role that is currently fulfilled by the Council for the Mathematical Sciences of bringing together the existing learned societies and giving them a forum in which they can interact will not disappear, but it would be better supported within an academy where it can also interact with the other functions of that academy, which would be much broader. Okay. What will it do? Well, it'll do what you think it'll do. let's keep, and so I'm just painfully aware that I'm going to be separating you from your drinks. So what I want to convince you of is that, oh God, press the wrong button. Let's go, how do I go backwards? Oh, I go backwards with the other button, obviously. What I want to convince you of is that detailed work has gone on. So there is a vision, and this is what it will do. This was a slide that was presented to DCIT, explaining to them why an academy was needed and what was the gap the academy was going to fill. The academy will advocate on behalf of all of the mathematical sciences. It wants to build an evidence base. We're mathematical sciences. We want evidence, which will then guide the design and implementation of policy interventions. We might even call upon some expertise in digital twins. We want to ensure the health of this discipline through, people pipeline at all stages, and of course champion the importance of having an excellent research base, the importance of excellent mathematical sciences for UK PLC, and indeed global PLC. This is just to convince you some very detailed thinking has gone on. This is something that came from the advocacy work stream, just thinking about, we can't do everything. How will we decide what things we're going to focus our attention on? And I don't want you to read all that. I haven't read all that. I have, but not for a long time. But they actually have thought very hard about the questions that need to be asked before the academy puts resource into things. Now, let me tell you the timeline. It's been a slightly protracted timeline. So 2018, January 2018, the bond review. That led to the then chair of the Council for the Mathematical Sciences commissioning something called the Big Maths Initiative, not perhaps a name I'd have chosen if I wanted to be taken seriously. But two committees were set up which were just thinking about how the CMS should respond to the bond review, or how should the community more generally respond to the bond review. Out of that, there was a town hall meeting, there was a community meeting, virtual, inevitably, practicing for a pandemic should it one day arise. And it was agreed that a team which David Abrahams, then the chair of the Isaac Newton Institute, director of the Isaac Newton Institute in Cambridge, he volunteered, I choose my word, to convene a team to write a green paper which would just give a preliminary vision. What would an academy look like and what would it require to bring it into being? And when I took over in June 2021, my first job was to nag Dave Abrahams, which I think was really unfair on both of us because Dave and I are good friends. But very busy man that he is, he did in September present us with a green paper which develops an initial vision, and a lot of work from a lot of people went into that initial vision. It was a skeleton, a lot of work needed to go on after that, but the CMS took that vision out to consultation in the community. We had a consultation involving virtual events and the opportunity to feedback online. It was advertised as widely as we could, but one thing that became very clear to us was that our communities were not as big as we would like to have thought from the feedback we got, but we got a very positive green light from the community to try to go to the next step, try to see, put a bit more flesh on the bones and see what was involved in setting up an academy, and was it plausible we could actually do it. And so a subgroup of the CMS board that I chaired wrote what is called here the Next Steps paper, which was saying, well, we've got to get a group of really committed people to do this. There's a lot of work to be done. And by October 2022, we had asked for expressions of interest from the community, of which I was expecting perhaps 3. We had nearly 100, from which it was an incredibly difficult job to put together an executive committee. We realized when we saw the breadth of expertise that we needed much more expertise than we'd realized. The executive committee was twice the size I had proposed in the Next Steps paper. But we put it together and we appointed a director with money, an executive director with money which is part of the additional maths funding and is run through the Isaac Newton Institute. I should say we're extremely grateful because we've piggybacked a lot on the Isaac Newton Institute, including stealing their deputy director who's been seconded as executive director of the Proto Academy for this phase for a couple of years. And we appointed a chair for the executive board and an executive board. And in October 2022, they started work in earnest. And some of the people doing all that work are in the room and will know I cannot claim any credit. They have done an incredible amount of work. By May 2023, they were ready to consult on their direction of travel to see if the community was still convinced. They had, I think, 5 online events, one specifically for early careers researchers, so that they could feed in what they wanted an academy to achieve. And I want to emphasize, the achievements of an academy will not be for the fellows of an academy. An academy does not exist for its fellows. An academy exists for the mathematical sciences. And the people who benefit from that will, of course, be mathematical scientists that go well beyond the scope of the fellowship, which won't be particularly big, I would conjecture, but also, of course, goes beyond that to economy and society and so on. After that consultation, very, very positive feedback. The most negative feedback I got was, will you please get on with it and stop asking us? We want you just to do it. And so by September 2023, the Academy had charitable status, so-called CIO status, and someone else can explain the details of that. But I think it was actually awarded in record time. It normally takes months and months after you've applied to the Charity Commission. Our application was turned around in, I think it was 17 days, which is an extraordinary testament to the detailed work that the Executive Committee had done. It was agreed already back in the Next Steps paper that we didn't need to wait for the Academy to exist. Before setting up a policy unit, mathematical sciences would benefit hugely from a unit dedicated to producing evidence-based documentation to help inform policy, policy for mathematical sciences and mathematical sciences for policy. And that unit was launched and now has 2 employees plus a bit of CMS support. And I think is already doing some valuable work, even though it's only a couple of months since it was really launched. And of course, the timeline, I hope, is that by 2025, this is the timeline that we laid out in the Next Steps paper, funds would be secured and the Academy would be launched. But funds is, of course, a big issue. So fairly detailed work has been done as to how much it costs to run an academy. Now, we're not envisaging an academy quite as big as this one. In fact, we're envisaging an academy with about 1/10 as many employees, but I'm sure you all realize that that's not a cheap venture. And we concluded that a minimal viable structure, the smallest thing worth setting up, we don't want something that's limping along on a shoestring and not serving the community. That would be a waste of everybody's time and energy. A minimal viable structure requires about £2 million per annum. And so with the agreement of the CMS board and the executive committee of the Proto Academy, we said that, the green light requires £2 million per annum for the first 3 years of operation, because obviously fundraising will continue beyond that. A fully fledged structure, around 25 FTE, which is what we think is really needed, maybe 3 million, a little bit over 3 million per annum. To do something really much more exciting, to have much more potential, 4 million per annum. And then I should mention that at the same time as the green paper for the Academy, a second green paper was produced for a knowledge exchange, connected centres were what it's called, connected centres for knowledge exchange, which has turned into the Knowledge Exchange Hub, again, very heavily supported by the Isaac Newton Institute and the Newton Gateway, but an independent organisation which is currently funded by UKRI money. We very much hope that that Knowledge Exchange Hub will, of course, be working closely with the Academy in the same way as the CMS will benefit from the support of the Academy. We do not have in those figures, the 2, 3, 4 million numbers, the cost of running that Knowledge Exchange Hub. We expect, and indeed we have very positive noises from UKRI, we expect that EPSRC in the short term will be funding that, and that probably will cost £750,000 per annum or so. That Knowledge Exchange Hub is up and running and doing valuable work already. We have been advised that it would be very unwise to try to accept a UKRI grant through an academy because the finance function required to accept UKRI grants runs to a very large team. Such are their rules and conditions. So I've left that as a separate line. But you can see the sort of numbers involved. So where the hell are we going to get the money from? Well, there's been some quite good news. In the autumn statement, Her Majesty's government announced up to £6 million over 3 years to fund the launch of an academy for the mathematical sciences in the UK. An academy, not necessarily our academy. Now, while it's disappointing that it's not necessarily our academy, they have now written to many of the bodies that I mentioned earlier, the sort of 50 or so professional organisations who serve, professional and learned societies that serve mathematical sciences. We've been working closely with many of them, and they've all been approached by DCIT to see if they will take part in a consultation, and they will be consulted to see what they would like from an academy, what they think the role of an academy would be, and then there will be a tender process which we very, very, very much hope we are the only people bidding for. Now, as a taxpayer, of course, I'm sort of grateful that they don't just hand out £6 million to someone who comes knocking and says, well, the community tell us they want an academy and we've set it up, can we have the dosh, please? But it is a little frustrating. We think it's going to take us till about May to get through that process. Many a slip twixt cup and lip, might even have a new government by then. I haven't read the news for the last hour. So we'll see, but we're cautiously optimistic that £2 million a year for the first 3 years will come through the door. And once in that kind of spending review return, that 2 million might just become something that is a habit. That's our hope. What we also hope, we don't want to be dependent on government for funding. We don't want to be dependent on any single organisation. The Academy for Mathematical Sciences will be an independent organisation, but having a couple of £1 million a year from government is very useful if you're trying to unlock philanthropic funding. And so we're going to try and use that in this next stage of leveraging additional support from elsewhere, and we do indeed already have some very positive signs. So that's where we're at. And I say we, I mean, I can't claim any benefit at all. Let me just show you the executive committee, some of whom are in the room, many of whom will be very familiar to you. And it's an impressive list of people from an impressive range of backgrounds. There are past presidents of each of the CMS learned societies, but there are also a lot of people with very different backgrounds there who have been incredibly useful. And just a parting comment, when I took over the project from Ian Diamond, to be quite honest, I was a bit ambivalent. I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted an academy for the mathematical sciences. When I saw the amount of work involved in setting up an academy for the mathematical sciences, I wasn't ambivalent at all. I wanted nothing to do with it. However, once I'm here as an observer, once I was sitting on this committee, observing these people, meeting these people, interacting with these people, most of whom I'd never met before, I realized that as an academic who, perhaps as an academic, has a surprisingly broad range of people I've interacted with, if anyone casts their mind back to RAE 2008, when we were split into 3 packages, I've had jobs in all 3 packages from RAE 2008. So my career has taken me across the mathematical sciences, but it's the tip of the iceberg. And the caliber of the people out there and their networks and their contribution and just interacting with this very diverse mindset has been a real eye-opener to me. And I think when the Academy is launched, and I think I am now saying when, I used to say if, I think I'm now saying when, I think it will be an incredible service to the community, and we will owe these people an enormous debt of gratitude. Thank you very much. And I can choose the comfy chair.
Thank you very much, Alison. I'd like to invite Paul and Roger up, please. So we have about 50 minutes to take any questions. And yeah. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, please.
I have a question for Paul Clark about digital twins. I know not very much about digital twins, but one thing I feel might be missing are actually mathematical models of digital twins. By that I mean that you've got a kind of, for me, a reflexive circuit, and the sort of problems that might come, which would require mathematical analysis, is whether these reflexive circuits are actually stable or not, or whether, if left alone, you might get this circuit going round and round, so that things get worse and worse. For example, in your models, they might sort of say, well, it would be much better if all these things go faster, and you end up with an explosion at the end, with everything going far too fast. So mathematical models would obviously be required to control and make sure that there is no such absurd instability in systems. Has this sort of work been done already?
I think, as I was trying to explain with the kind of the slide with the palette, I mean, digital twins absolutely do contain, an amalgam of algorithms and equations and mathematical models and so forth. That is how, many of them are implemented in my experience. And obviously there are different architectures and different use cases which will, demand a different mix or a different amalgam based on the problem that you're solving. Obviously, making sure that, there is that stable behavior, and, sorry, say again?
Obviously, the individual bits may be all right.
Yes.
It's the overall whole that I'm worried about.
Yes, I suppose that's where, training your simulation and fitting it, to reality to make sure that, it is a high fidelity model. I mean, I think one of the wonderful things about simulation that many of you will be able to be aware of is that building one teaches you what you don't know. So because when it doesn't work, which is often what happens, you realize you've missed something out. You've missed out a critical signal that actually is part of the real world behavior that your simulation doesn't have, and that's why it doesn't work. But I have to say, I haven't encountered the problem that you suggest, which is some kind of runaway model that could start predicting, but I can understand that theoretically it's possible. It's just outside my experience, I'm afraid. So but I suppose I'm always, a bit like aircraft, I'm always a great believer in having multiple gyros that don't believe one another. And I think the more ways that you can build a model and kind of peer review it with a model built in a completely different way, whether it's an AI model or a mathematical OR model or whatever, the better we can sleep at night rather than actually having just one flavor of model that somehow we entrust is a true reflection of reality.
Thank you. Yes, please, Ruthie.
Thank you. Can I say thank you to all three speakers? I think it's a fascinating coverage. I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment, but I would welcome your comments on it. One of the things that Roger picked up from the past was that whoever was head of OR should be working directly with the Commander-in-Chief. And one of the things that Paul mentioned was that actually a lot of senior managers see this sort of work as like a wild animal they've never come across before. And then Alison is talking about the Academy of Mathematical Sciences speaking for the mathematical sciences. And I wonder if you can comment on this, the importance of the mathematical sciences output getting into the right level of decision-making rather than operating in the foothills.
Are you looking at me?
Yeah.
Yes, I think we will.
I think, yeah, that would be for you, Alice.
Absolutely vital, and from the perspective of mathematical modelling, it's always deeply frustrating to be approached by a scientist who comes up to you and says, okay, can you prove to us that the answer is 42, or whatever answer they've conjectured, after the event? And as someone who's worked in a statistics department for a long time, I know my colleagues get very frustrated by people gathering data before asking about design of experiment. And that's very much actually at the heart of, I think, everything we do. We should get the mathematical thinking, mathematical sciences thinking, embedded at a very early stage, not least because it gives us a framework within which to operate. And I think you're very right in observing that you do a simulation and you find out what's missing. Well, almost everything I do, I produce a mathematical model and my students do a simulation because I'm technically incompetent. And then we observe what's missing and we start sort of building on it. But I think that right across government, industry, everything, it's important to embed that thinking from the beginning, because it really enables that critical thinking, that analytic thinking, which can, I think, really clarify where the problems lie. And it helps identify what we don't know as well.
I mean, perhaps I'll just comment from the historical point of view. I mean, certainly I think, and I guess many people in the audience will have experience of this. And one of the reasons sort of hypothesized for what you might call the OR group, reporting directly to the chief executive, and also roaming around, finding unrecognized problems that desperately need to be seen, was the fact, actually, in the last couple of decades, that everybody's fiddling with spreadsheets. Everybody thinks they're doing sort of quantitative management in a very local way, but actually probably a very restricted way. But it means is people haven't felt that need for that central pool of expertise to say, hey, I've got a micro, I've got a laptop, I've got Excel or whatever it is on their machine, so I can do it for myself. Now, I don't think that's obviously worked in some sort of routine-ish areas, but I don't think it's sort of worked generally. And I mean, as I mentioned, the hobbies of just collecting statistics. Well, I do, from reading around for my talk, I did get a quote from Blackett, and there's lots of quotes from Blackett, and one is that collecting routine statistics is no more operational research than collecting beetles is biology. Whether that's actually relevant to what you asked, Ruth, I'm not sure. But since it came to mind, I thought I'd recount it.
Great. Thank you.
So, yeah.
Okay. Please, then we'll come to you, Tony. Sorry. Please go.
So, no, thank you very much for your talk today. A comment that's going to go into a question, because I was very fascinated by one of your slides, Roger, that you had sort of the ideology of operations research as being a broad church. It's not a set of practices necessarily. It's asking, is it useful? Because I would say I come from mathematical biology, a different field, but you could change that title to exactly that and it would still fit. We don't actually have practices that we must learn by rote. We ask, what technique will best fit the answer? And I think that came across through the other talks as well, that mathematics as a science is most healthy when we're not being siloed. And something that was very much raised as the idea of the academy, the idea that it's mathematical sciences now, not just mathematics. Which brings me then to the question, we had a really nice list of where operations research touched during World War II. The idea of, where to place your depth charges, color of airplanes was one of the things that I didn't know highlighted. But one thing seemed missing, I don't know if it actually was used, so I'd like to hear your knowledge on this. Was it ever used in Bletchley Park, Station X, during cryptography breaking?
Yes, but we can't tell you.
I think the answer is I don't know, to be honest. I mean, obviously, Station X was surrounded by multiple walls of secrecy, which, of course, even lasted decades after the war as to what happened. I mean, it's a very fair question. It wouldn't surprise me if there was some interaction, but of course, the product from Station X, was very carefully guarded. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that. Just thinking about the issue of the broad church, and I guess these days, perhaps many disciplines, do think of themselves as broad churches, and in fact, in a sense, genuinely are. But I mean, there's one example, sort of say in the 70s, 80s, where I talked about the development of soft methods, problem structuring methods. I mean, there was a considerable, well, I was going to say undercurrent, it's more than undercurrent, a view in the United States that this wasn't OR. You know, on the whole, I've no idea whether they've recovered from that in the States. I mean, I think if it ever grew up in Britain, it was sort of quickly dissipated. But yeah, I mean, there was a sort of this is not OR reaction. And in fact, you know, I mean, the journals, Operations Research, I think, you know, the premier US journal at one point, you know, wouldn't take papers on soft OR. I mean, is that right? I'm looking at my sort of academic colleagues. But so, you know, broad churches sometimes take a little bit of time to become as broad as they should.
Can I just add to that? Because Alison and I were having a discussion before the event kicked off about, you know, the importance of selecting the best possible tool, regardless of whether that tool comes from your own sort of favorite stable, you know, and I think this is, you know, a serious issue. It's not just about siloing. I think it's also about, you know, dogma and not invented here and things like that. And you know, as I said in my talk, I'm a passionate advocate for intersectional thinking. And, you know, if you look across our PSREs, you know, it's a question I've asked, you know, I wonder how much intersectionality is going on across those different institutions. And I really hope that when it comes to the diagram that Alison put up of that growing ecosystem of academies, that we find a way to foster that intersectionality across those to create ways of solving, you know, that are about coming up with the best possible solution with the best possible mix of tools, regardless of who owns those tools or, you know, which subject you were qualified in or so forth. You know, I just think that's vital given the kind of problems we now face.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry, did you want to?
I'll just say one thing, yeah, I mean that was, I guess, one advantage that the wartime pioneers had, you know, that they were working with an entirely blank canvas. Actually, they shouldn't have been working with a completely blank canvas, because you can actually point to 3 or 4 examples of OR done by various people in the First World War, but it was all lost and forgotten. But so they were working with a blank canvas. So, you know, it didn't get into, well, you know, this is not what we do. Well, you know, they were inventing from absolute scratch what they were doing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for all the speakers. Really interesting the way they linked them together. And just on the Bletchley Park question, clearly, if you look at Turing, Tutt and Welshman, they were using mathematics to solve problems. And therefore, in my root books, they were actually doing OR. Whether it was called OR or not, it doesn't really matter. But we will have to shoot you if you ask the question again. On the general theme, I was picking up on what Ruth was saying there. Roger, you highlighted the point about how we needed to be close to the decision makers. And then Paul, you were talking about how you influence those decision makers by building those models. And then Alison, you've got the fact that we're trying to build an academy to support those people influencing the decision makers. So I think there's a common theme there. What interests me about what you've discussed there is that we're modeling the systems, and I wonder whether there's something, and maybe it's in the digital twin world, and this might come across as facetious, but it's not meant to be. How can we build a digital twin of the decision makers in order to understand how to influence them?
Oh, I would say absolutely, yes. I mean, I think building digital twins of how our political system works or doesn't work, how, you know, our democracy works. You know, I mean, I didn't, you know, in my factors of 10, I went up towards Earth twins, but you can go down. You know, I've certainly spoken to people who build digital twins of synthetic cells, but I think increasingly one of the really interesting areas is digital twins of humans, whether it be organs and systems or complete humans one day. And that's off on to a whole different big rabbit hole to do with immortality and goodness knows what. But I do think we can build digital twins, you know, of those kind of entities, and I think we should we should think about that. We obviously also have to think about what the ethical and social and privacy and other sorts of considerations that come maybe with that. But at the end of the day, you can build a digital twin of anything.
I think I defy you to build a digital twin of Boris Johnson which has any predictive power.
David, please.
You expect me to fall for that? It's behind you. Right, thank David Lane, Henley Business School. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Roger, thank you for reminding us. I was once asked at an OR conference whether we could really say, what has OR actually contributed? And I referred to the Battle of Britain and offered the counterfactual, what if it hadn't been there, and said, well, we did save the world. You might want to use that in future arguments. Well, that's great. Professor Etheridge, that sounds excellent. I'm a mathematician. I've been doing mathematical modelling for 40 years. I'd like to be part of that. There's so much we've got to offer. Thank you for all that, and thank you to everybody else who's contributed. Paul, the model of the world that you want, well, it was written in 1971 by Jay Forrester at MIT. He published it in his book, World Dynamics. It did some good and still does some good. But I worry about this urge to build bigger and bigger models of things and whether that's really the answer. And what I've been trying to find is a rather beautiful exchange in Brecht's The Life of Galileo, where Brecht talks about his belief in human reason and how people will react to scientific rationality. And the response he gets from his friend, a mathematician, Segredo, is, well, let me tell you something. I don't believe in human reason. 40 years spent amongst human beings has again and again brought it home to me that they are not open to reason. Show them a comet with a red tail, scare them out of their houses, scare them out of their wits, and they'll rush out of their houses and break their legs. But try making one rational statement to them and back it up with 7 proofs, and they'll just laugh at you. I will carry on building simulation models. I will be part of the initiatives here. But I suspect that the bigger problem is what? Greed, short-term thinking, avarice. And I'm not sure that simulation models is really going to help us do that. And it's interesting that even whilst I was formulating my question, you started talking about Boris Johnson. I'm sorry to sign a negative note, but this looks like a kind of techno-optimism from the 50s and 60s, and I'm not sure it's really tackling the problem that we have. Let me throw that challenge at you.
Well, I mentioned the kind of the concept of nudging. I think, you know, behavioral change, as we know, is very hard to bring about. You know, I can say that as a personal level. I think one can see it, you know, in one's families and people you know. Therefore, you know, it takes, I think nudging and continual sort of, you know, banging away at things until you somehow get resonance and actually things start to shift. I don't know how else one can do it. You know, maybe one believes in sort of Brownian motion and all the molecules in the room will sort of magically line up on one side and suddenly, you know, human behavior will change from what it is now to magically something much better. But probably it won't happen fast enough. So I think we need different ways of educating. I think we need people to be able to understand futures that at the moment they can't. I mean, I've coined a term, it's in my long list of different ways of thinking. I think this concept of pandemic thinking, you know, is important, which is the rate at which the completely unthinkable becomes thinkable, you know, is extraordinary. But why is it that as humans we have to wait until we have a pandemic in order to be able to believe we can lock down a planet in 2 weeks? Not that we want to lock down a planet, but to be able to embrace that level of synchronized kind of change, even if it wasn't necessarily cooperation. You know, I think that just demonstrates that you know, we can embrace the unthinkable, but we have to, if we're not going to be forced into it, as we kind of were there by our leaders and by the virus, I think we have to enable people to step into futures that at the moment they either don't believe are going to happen, or they don't understand, or they think are going to be somebody else's problem to solve. And that's part of better way of educating, I think, which our current education systems are a long way off, but that's another subject for another night.
Great, thanks. We'll take one more, and then we'll draw the using circles. Yes.
Hi, can I continue the party pooper theme? There are many publications around exploring issues like the limits of and the limits to rationality, particularly in the economics literature. And a very influential book in the R community was Rational Analysis for a Problematic World. I see its author is here. And there's also a famous quote from George Box, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And so I just want to explore the fact that there might well be limits to rational modelling, and that an overemphasis on rationality might just be a mistake. I'm not arguing that we go down, if I can refer to the Boris Johnson route, I'm not arguing that at all. But I'm saying there are perhaps occasions when rationality, as we often conceive it here in mathematical terms, is not the way to go. Party pooper question.
I think that's just emphasising that we need to be able to build into our models human behaviour and uncertainty, but it doesn't stop a model being useful, as you say. Mm-hmm. And I myself would certainly say that we ought to be talking to social scientists, in fact, all our colleagues at the humanities, understanding better communication, understanding better human behaviour. I know, as a probabilist, if a statistic is applied to me, you've got a 2% chance of whatever, the end of the world is nigh. If it's applied to you, I'm sorry, mate, I don't think that's anything to worry about. And I think we need to understand that even if we are as rational as we like to think we are, actually humans aren't, and that is something we need to build in.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, and I think that's why, you know, in that list of technologies that I feel very passionately about and cook with, you know, living labs are such an important part, because living labs are not like test beds. Living labs involve real people you're delivering real services to real people, and what the people inject is unpredictability and uncertainty and diversity, whereas test beds are all about reproducibility and homogeneity. And, you know, people are wonderful in terms of how they gamify things and don't do what you tell them to. So we absolutely, I agree, have to have people in that life cycle. But I think the other thing I would say, if I hadn't just forgot, I know what it was, which is I think it's about different modalities. In the same way that we have kind of system one, system two thinking, I think, you know, a favorite of mine is the different modalities for say, autonomous vehicles. You know, sometimes we want autonomous vehicles to be autonomous because they're in an urban setting with people jumping out at traffic lights and cats and so forth. And when we put them on motorways and we want them to be close together, we want them to be orchestrated, because that's the only way in which we can really get the throughputs that we want in those kinds of situations. So we need those vehicles to be able to have those different modalities. And I think the same is true for, you know, I think there are cases where we want, you know, to try and instill greater rational behavior of individuals. But I think there are times when we just need to orchestrate, and we need to have some sense of, you know, collective organization. And that's just two modalities. I'm sure there are many others. And I think we have to, coming back to your point, I think we have to blend all those different modalities together into you know, how we try and solve problems and do things better. And therefore we have to be able to model those different modalities as well. But that's probably turtles all the way down. But anyway, right.
Great.
I was only going to mention that, I mean, in terms of modeling human behavior, I mean, it was something, well, certainly in my time in defense, OR, and probably in the 13 years since I retired, we were always trying to do, modeling commanders' decision making. And of course, sometimes we try to do that, well, to use the phrase digital twin. Other times we had to get them in the loop in war games or whatever. I would hope that things have moved on at least some way in the 13 years that I've been out of touch. So, I mean, maybe there is a sort of a worthwhile quantum of expertise in the defence community. You could think about modelling the human, admittedly a sort of bounded set of humans, i.e. human military commanders. I don't think we ever tried to model politicians. Well, maybe we did once or twice, but that's another story.
I know we're out of time, but just, you've reminded me of something I want to throw in because I think it's not come up, which is we've talked about modeling and AI and these are things. I think the bit that's often missed out is the concept of a hive mind. And I think there are some really interesting opportunities about how do we pull communities of people together into collective thinking and decision-making, you know, the kind of phone a friend on steroids, you could say, you know, and there are companies like Unanimous.ai who've done work in this area and others. And I just think we've got to think about how do we blend, you know, pulling together that kind of collective consciousness and decision-making of humans with artificial intelligence and with models. And I think there's, you know, maybe that's 3 examples of different modalities, because I think they all have different things to offer. And maybe a blend of those could be very powerful in solving problems.
Thank you very much.